listening to Resist and Restore, a podcast from the Circle of Hope Pastors, where we're extending the table of our dialogue. I'm Johnny Rashid. I use he, him pronouns.
I'm Rachel Sensenig, she, her. I'm
Julie Hoke, she, her.
Nice to start this podcast smiling with y'all, because this is the it's beginning of January now, but it's the kind of the reflection on 2021 podcast that we have, and we're going to be doing an activity that Rachel will lead us in for the bulk of the podcast about consolations and desolations. So starting off with some smiles is good if we're going to get to the bottoms of our souls, which we'll have an intimate time with you later and invite you into that as well. We'll end with what's been nourishing our soul and spiritual show and tell. But we're going to start with talkback. And I think, Julie, you're going to frame this for us, yeah?
Yeah, this first section is all about what we're hearing from people in our community. Your voice matters. What you bring to the life of our body matters. And we're always trying to pay attention to what the Spirit is doing and saying through the church. So this talkback section is all about sharing what we're hearing in the ways that you're talking back. And Rachel, you got some beautiful stories at the start of this year as people were reflecting, I think, on their year. What was the prompt that you asked?
We were talking about our Advent journeys. How did we see God work through Advent, or what were we still waiting and longing for? So yeah, thank you, Julie. People shared some wonderful stories, and it was the last meeting of the year, and I think it ended up kind of launching us into the new year with some evidence of God with us, Emmanuel. Even in the midst of all the hard things of 2021. So thinking of one note from my friend Megan. She said that in the midst of all these hard things she was facing through Advent, the verse in Isaiah, the prophet Isaiah 43 came to her. Forget the former things, do not dwell in the past. See, I am doing a new thing. Now it springs up. Do you not perceive it? I am making a way in the wilderness and streams in the wasteland. And she was feeling that wasteland. So she said she started praying this verse, and she took it to her new makeshift prayer corner in the mornings. And she talked about it with her spiritual director. And she says, she helped me let the truth of this verse sink in. God is doing a new thing, not me. In my instinct to always do something, anything to help, she encouraged me to create space, to be a witness to God's work. What do you think about that, pastors? Creating space to witness God's work.
It's a totally different posture than the urgency to do things ourselves.
Yes.
I love that. As I hear that description, I think about gardening, and I think about tending to what God is doing. It's a very gardening kind of posture. So I resonate with that.
Yes.
We can't make things grow.
Right. We can just create the environment and tend to what God is doing.
Mm-hmm.
One more from my friend Rand here. He said a lot of great things, but I just want to pull out this one part. He said he was talking, I think, about realizing his worth is not just in what he produces, that's kind of like the empire speaking, our capitalist empire speaking to us. And he says, about what we can get done or not get done, what we can produce. He says, God calls me out of the self defined by power and into the self defined by its relation to the wellspring of all existence. God calls me out of the self defined by power and into the self defined by its relation to the wellspring of all existence. That's kind of what you're saying about gardening, Julie, that we can't make things grow. We can't make ourselves grow even. But connected to God, we're connected to the source of life. So I was so inspired by how Rand was helping us go there. Johnny, what do you think? Advent journey, how did you see God show up in Advent?
Well, first of all, I just want to say this about what Rand said too. He wrote this, which made me laugh. He said, Paul in Ephesians told us that our struggles are with the principalities and powers of this world. And like Michael Jordan, I took that personally. Do you know that meme? Where
No.
there's a Michael Jordan documentary that came out in the pandemic, and it's just a picture of him sitting down, and it says, I took that personally under it, because that's like the context of what it was. So I just appreciate that joke very much from Rand, because I don't think, like, he writes this really beautiful thing and he adds this joke to it that, like, I would say a small group of online people would understand. Mm-hmm. And I'm just going to say that to you, Rand. I see you. I love you. That's beautiful to me.
Yes, Rand, thank you for your humor.
I like thinking about Advent and the coming liberation, and how I'm not going to how it will arrive in my life, as opposed to something that I make for myself, right? So when Megan's quoting Isaiah 43, I feel very inspired by that, because Isaiah 43 is in 2nd Isaiah, so it's when they're out of Babylonian captivity. So it's post-exilic, and they are waiting for something new to happen, and God will provide that new thing. So when Christians read that, of course, we think of Jesus being that new thing, and especially during Advent. For those Jewish people, it was whatever Savior was going to come for them, you know. And even now for us, Advent is always a good time, because I not only remember God's faithfulness to the prophets and to Mary and John the Baptist and the shepherds, but also that Jesus is coming now, here. And so, yeah, like, I am magnifying God with Mary during Advent, hoping for that liberation in my present circumstance. You know, and it kind of feeds into what we'll talk about later, but, like, I can get into the desolation because the ultimate consolation, the ultimate counselor will come and liberate me. So that's, Advent's a good time, was a good time for me to get down into that stuff, and await liberation, await God's arrival. And it does help me to imagine, I know, at least me anyway, what post-exilic Israel was experiencing.
Thanks for talking back, everyone. Keep sharing what God is doing in your life, what you see God doing in our communal life together. The more we can pay attention and reflect and name that, I think the more we can live into it together. Mm-hmm. And the world is desperate for Jesus followers to not just sing the truth of Mary's song with her, but to live it. So we're helping each other do that, even when we talk back.
That's right. I'm so glad you're listening to our podcast. Like Julie was saying, we want you to talk back to us. So go ahead and email resistandrestorepodcast@circleofhope.net. If you email us with a reflection on the show, reflection on what we just said, we'll get you on the podcast. Get your words on there and respond to them as well. We'd love to hear from you. And we'd love you to help others that you know would be blessed by this podcast hear it. And there's a few ways you can do that. Wherever you listen to this podcast, subscribe. Write a review for us as well and give us a high rating. Both of those things help people who are interested in material like this find us. We're not very concerned with how successful we are, but we're more interested in finding people who are looking for us. And you can share in our common fund as well. That will help us too. Go to circleofhope.church. There's a place to give on there. You can contribute to the podcast specifically or to the whole cause, which will help this podcast go, help Laura, who edits the podcast, and also just keep things going in Circle of Hope and give you another connection with us as well. And while you're on there, check out our Sunday meetings in our cells, because we'd love for you to be a part of our greater community as well. Thanks again for listening. You smiling at, Rachel?
I'm smiling at you.
Why?
Because I love you. All right, let's get into the heart of our show here today. We want to talk about 2021, the now famous year, and we want to look at it in an Ignatian way, thinking of it in terms of our desolations and consolations. And typically, the consolations are moments or experiences that help us move toward an awareness of God's active presence in the world. And desolations are moments or experiences that hide that awareness of God's active presence, and they might cause us to turn in on ourselves or be drained of energy, but to not be aware of what God is doing. And the discipline of Ignatian reflection calls us to this wonderful discovery of looking for God in all things, being open to the possibility that maybe God is working in all the different parts of our lives, even the ones that we don't appreciate very much. Terrible things happen in the world, as we know, all the time, and we experience them, and they're really hard. But we want to look back together with you all on the year and talk about the consolations and desolations that we've experienced. So, Johnny, how about you start us off?
Should we start with consolations or desolations? Or should we mix them together?
Let's end with the good news. So let's start with desolation.
We end with what's feeding our soul, so we will come back to that.
Right.
All right, I'll give you a desolation. I am discouraged, right? It's January 5th today, 2022. March 12th, 2020 is when we, changed things in Circle of Hope because of the pandemic. It's almost 2 years ago.
Wait, what do you mean?
That's the day we said, hey, we're going to go online. Things are changing. Coronavirus is here. That was the day, right?
I'm amazed you remember the date. I think I've blocked it out.
It was the Thursday before the Sunday.
Yeah.
I remember the week before. I've told the story 1,000 times, but the week before, coronavirus is in the air, but it's not in Philadelphia yet. And I'm cutting up the communion bread into individual pieces, thinking, this'll save us. You just don't know what you're doing.
Yeah.
No idea.
My birthday is March 19th, so I remember that day so clearly, just wanting to get people together to play music, because I felt in my spirit like it might be the last time we could do that for a while, and it was.
So, and I know we're vaccinated, and Philadelphia has a very high vaccination rate, for which I'm thankful, and our children are over 2. But, a 40% positivity rate in Philadelphia because of Omicron. Omicron is it's just so, it's so wild. It's astronomical, right? So it's there's definitely some discouragement. And schools are shutting down this week, so it's are we ever going to get out of this thing? Is it possible? Because we always said we're not going back, Okay, I get that. Are we going forward? That doesn't feel like that right now. It's hard, and the pandemic anxiety of what to do, what not to do, what's safe, what isn't safe. And then a lot of people are getting sick. I know more people this year that got sick than I did the first year of the pandemic. So
Yep.
that's wild, right? My uncle's in the hospital, still on oxygen. So things aren't good. That's a desolation, big time, And it's emotional. It's hard, And I think we'll get through it. I'm a little frustrated that it seems like the way we're going to get through it is just to have it rip through us until we're all have some immunity because we've been so exposed, and that's discouraging. Like, we couldn't work on it together that well as a society, and it was even hard to do it as a church at times. So yeah, that's a big desolation for me.
Johnny, you just summarized about hundreds of moments of desolation for me. I mean, right? Isn't it true that some of what you just said is like these recurring thoughts at multiple points throughout the last year? Mm-hmm. So I resonate with that personally.
Me too. Canceling events or, being back on a camera instead of being with people in embodied ways. It's hard for me to, as a pastor, to experience the connection through a camera that I would normally have when we're able to be together in person. So that is a desolation for me, for sure.
Totally. Can you share more about that? What's happening when you're on the camera, you're doing your talk, your message? What's happening? What's the big versus being in the room at South Broad, for example, or being in the park, Julie?
Oh, it just feels lonely to me because I realize I know that the great joy of pastoring for me is the people, and so not being able to see my friends' faces and their reactions and see how they're doing and have the kind of mutuality in the moment that I feel the Spirit working actively in when we can see each other. It's harder to, by faith I can have it with the camera, but it's hard to keep that faith going.
Yeah,
Totally.
Specifically talking to just to the lens. Like here on Zoom, I can at least see your faces. With my cell, we have amazing ability to connect, given what I might have imagined 2 years ago, But just speaking to a lens and recording content for our at-home Sunday meeting is super different. It's like a skill to keep up your energy and to pace and all of that. It's hard to do without the energy of another human being and the feedback of connection that happens.
Yes.
I have done many retakes of those videos, and those are moments of desolation. It's hard to do.
Mm-hmm. I can relate. It's also been hard to lose people this year. People who have left our church for one reason or other. I miss them. I feel the pain of that. And in particular, one of our pastors resigned, Ben, and I know we all miss him. And we don't have time here to get into all the layers of it, but I think just naming that loss is a desolation.
Absolutely.
Totally. Yeah, I mean, people leaving, Ben resigning. When we told the church about it, we said, this wasn't what was supposed to happen. This isn't what we wanted to happen, right? It's a real loss. And I have to say that the tensions and the conflicts that lead up to these moments aren't resolved when there's that sort of departure, right? That's there's no, and you just kind of are left with what feels to me like it's painful, it's loss, it's suffering, it feels like a failure, there's no, because what we want is transformation, redemption, people changing, people moving with God, and we all, and pastors know this, the modus operandi of the pastors is suffering. That's what we can, and of Christians, by the way, friends, sorry to break it to you. But like, yeah, we can expect that, and Jesus told us that, so we know, you know. But even expecting it, or even knowing that when we lead, some people will be upset and some people will leave, and that's just how it is. Even knowing that doesn't really help the pain of it, you know. We also know we're gonna die. You know what I mean? Like, that doesn't change the reality of it, and I think it's important to. Like, I never want to be numb to the pain of that. Even if I understand it's coming and I don't like blame myself or like condemn myself when it happens, but like, I still want to feel the feeling. I still want to feel the pain. And I think I don't know, I think that having a soft heart is helpful for growth. But, you know, there was definitely times this year where it's like, okay, I'm softened enough. Okay, I don't need any more. I'm good. There's a lot of suffering, you know. Like, I cried more this year than I did for the last 10 years. You know, like in public, in situations, gosh, it's real painful.
Yep. I see that, Johnny. I hear that. We're committed to having open hearts, but it's so much easier to talk about. Like, I remember hearing sermons about, like, God will stretch our hearts, and this is a good thing. And then when it's actually happening, it just feels terrible. Like, this, like, you know, like your wounds are exposed and you're just being, like, ripped apart. And, that happens because we love. Because we love people, because we love each other. If we didn't, it wouldn't hurt.
I agree with you.
Yeah. I can relate to all of that, and I'm just sitting here thinking, like, what can I add to this? It feels hard to even talk about. Like, I don't feel we're doing this exercise here at the end of the year, but I almost feel like I want to be through it in order to like reflect back. And it feels so fresh and so present that I don't feel through anything. So it's hard to summarize, or it is still very present. And the way grief works, you know, it shows up at different points. We can't live in our sense of grief and loss all the time. You know, we have to keep moving, but then we also need to, like you're saying, that we need to make space for our hearts to feel and ourselves to grieve, and let the fullness of the emotions and the gravity of all of it be present. I'm still figuring out how to do that.
Yeah, me too.
This is connected to people losing people, but anti-racist work has been particularly challenging over the last 2 years or so, a little less than that, a year and a half. There's so many moments where I want to retreat or give up or let it go and decide this doesn't work. We're not supposed to do this. We're not really ready to do it. And that's so painful, right? It's painful to see, to lose hope, which there have been many moments where I'm feeling that way, or to be cynical or not to advocate for others or myself. And it's hard, you know. It's hard to see people of color suffer. It's hard to see white people struggle through it. And as a pastor, and I think this speaks for all of us, trying to figure out how to navigate all of this, it's stressful, you know. It's very personal work, and I think we expected it to be, but it's still, you know, surprising. You know, it's scary. It's vulnerable. There's moments where, like, there's a lot at stake, you know. And it changes how we do dialogue. It changes our open way of talking and relating, you know. And that's new for people. It's hard to even explain why we would decide to have guardrails or agreements during a meeting, right? That's like new. It's like, okay, so this is all new territory we're going in together. So like it's very hard. It's existentially exhausting for me. Yeah. Any more? Y'all relate? You want to share more about that? Please.
Yeah. I think that I've definitely experienced lots of moments of desolation around in my own journey of transformation, and then also in our church's journey. We have to undergo a lot of change to be able to change in our way of working as a church, and the solidarity required for us to be a more diverse and anti-racist church. And it feels hard to grow publicly in that as a leader, and also, make mistakes and be able to name them and confess and repent and keep going and call us into the changes and the transformation that we need to have.
Mm-hmm.
We do this work. Our faith is about redemption and transformation. We want everybody. When we say we're extending the table of our dialogue, we want everybody at the table. There's moments
Mm-hmm.
where in the present moment, it doesn't seem like it's possible to have everyone at the table. Even if in the future it can be, or we can work towards that. And that's really hard. And the desolation for me expresses itself as hopelessness to white supremacy is too strong of a force to try to combat. Do you remember last year when there was a shipping vessel that got caught in the Suez Canal? Do you remember this?
Mm-hmm.
And it stopped the world economy for 3 days. It's great we have an economy that can stop like that just because the canal's blocked. Capitalism's awesome. Anyway, it was in Egypt, so I was paying attention to it. Egypt saved the world. I want to just say that. I think twice. There was an Israeli-Palestinian conflict that Egypt was at the table for, that we helped bring some peace. I'm Egyptian, y'all, in case you didn't know. And then I saw the video of the Egyptian engineers when they finally released the thing, and they were so happy. It was great to see them. But anyway, my point is, white supremacy is like this big shipping vessel stuck in the Suez Canal. Mm-hmm. And there was this meme that was going around where this tiny little, it looked like a toy next to it. It was like this vehicle that digs. What do they call those things? I don't know what it's called. But I want to look it up. Sorry, I have to do this.
Like a front end loader or a backhoe or a backhoe. Is that what you mean?
I was trying to think about when my son was little and he would watch all these machines.
Exactly. This little yellow backhoe on the Suez Canal that's kind of just digging, and this huge thing. And it's like, okay, that's me, and this is white supremacy. Mm. What? It's going to crush me, Mm. So that's sometimes what it feels like. There's this prayer that says, oh God, my ship is so small, but the sea is so great. Mm-hmm. So sometimes it's felt like that. It feels like there's moments where but we're fishing all night. We're not catching anything. Mm. So we need Jesus to come. Make a miracle happen, Lord. Show us how to do this. So there is some consolation in that, but gosh, the desperation of empty nets or the impossible task ahead of us is really hard.
Yeah, it's a desolation for me when it feels like the humility that's required for white people to be led by and to listen and to believe. Mm-hmm. The stories of BIPOC folks, why is it so hard to believe? Or maybe why is it so easy to delegitimize BIPOC people's experience. Those are moments of desolation. Because as the church, it should, I don't know if that's helpful to say, but like, I feel like Jesus leads us into the humility that we need to be transformed. That's essential for this life as a follower of Jesus. So the church is the place to do this work together, to be transformed, to render the power of whiteness conquered. I mean, it's a lifelong journey, but like that's the kind of transformation that Jesus offers us, is to the principalities and powers that Rand was talking about. You know, that's the battle we're fighting. So it feels like we, as the church, should be good at this or something. And it feels like moments of desolation when for me, when I'm like, I didn't know it would be this hard. I didn't know it would feel this personal. I didn't know that I would feel so misunderstood, or that what Jesus is leading us into could be so easily dismissed and boxed up as something else. You know, like all of these things. Those are moments of desolation.
Totally.
Jesus's posture is so vulnerable. You're right, Julie. We're called into that vulnerability, especially as white people, to keep seeing what we didn't see.
You know, can I add more to the bad stuff?
Let's just keep it going.
Okay, it's January 5th. January 6th is tomorrow. A year ago is the insurrection. Remember that?
Oh, wow.
And that's a consolation, right? Sorry, that's a desolation. The desolation is, I remember that night. I watched it happen. They breached the Capitol. And it's like kind of scary what's going on, right? And then at night, because they're doing this voting count that's kind of performative anyway. It's like a performa type of thing. And the senators are there. They're there all night. They're scared. And they're doing this count at the end of the night. And like there's these impassioned senators like talking about this crazy experience that they had. And that many of them courted into happening, right? Or enabled it in some ways. So like what we thought was a consolation ultimately was like, yeah, I mean, I don't think this is a surprise to our listening audience, but Trump not being president felt good to me. But, you know, I mean, so that's like, is that a consolation? Kind of. But, you know, I mean, like there was a moment where like, we're happy that this mean person isn't the president anymore. But like, the desolation is that Joe Biden's so like, ugh, you know? Like that's not, like everything kind of sucks still. Bad things are happening. It's not really working out. Like there is no liberation here. There's no revolution. And we didn't think Joe Biden would do that anyway. But like that moment where it's like, oh, this is harder. This is just hard work. There's a lot to do here. And like a new administration doesn't fundamentally change everything. I'm not saying there is no difference. I'm not like trying to do that right now. But like, yeah, it's just like, okay, people are still suffering. They're still unsatisfied with their jobs. They're still quitting. Coronavirus is still here. Kids still need all sorts of stuff. Climate change is still a big problem. Afghanistan's a debacle. It's like, what a mess. There's no, you know, and like the depth of desolation that we were in, at least that I was in during the Trump administration, made me feel like any breathing room out of it was going to be consolation. But it didn't feel like that ultimately. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Like, I'm not interested in going back to, like, wild insurrection, crazy president. But it's just a reminder that, like, yeah, you know, this is all still a lot. There's still a lot to, there's still, our hope isn't in this process, you know? Especially when there's, like, Haitian immigrants at the border, and then the Border Patrol's treating them, like, you know, the same way that Trump did or something, you know? So it's like, gosh, it's still bad. Lots of things that aren't good. So that it's disappointing that ultimately it still felt like a desolation.
Yeah. I had a little bit of a hard time being surprised about the whole mess of the insurrection. I think related to growing up in a military family, I always even sensed as a little kid, like, this is really messed up. The empire is just such a trap, and using force, using weapons to oppress all the time. So it's just, like, brokering in that world, just, there's no hope in it. And I'm so glad that Jesus keeps showing us a new way.
Can we move to Consolations, y'all?
Oh, yeah.
Can we do that?
Absolutely.
That was all Desolations, right?
Yeah.
2021, here we are. 2022. Okay, one consolation. I think we advanced as a church in the pandemic to learn how to connect with more people online and otherwise. We imagined new possibilities, Many of our meetings are now accessible via in-person and Zoom. So, like, that kind of innovation that maybe we didn't even think was good or possible before, but that kind of transformation is encouraging for me. That's a consolation. I have more, but let's
Definitely. I would add to that just the flexibility and creativity of the church has been a consolation. My congregation in particular has had to be so
Oh my goodness, yes.
flexible and adaptable. The building we used to rent filled up with mold during this pandemic year. We couldn't go back inside. We spent 6 months meeting in the park, and it was beautiful in so many ways, challenging in other ways too. But it definitely had many moments of consolation, and still do when I go for a walk through the park. Literally, the space that we meet feels comforting to me and familiar in a whole new way, because gathering there publicly to worship under these huge, beautiful London plane trees in the morning sun, just lots of beautiful moments of consolation there with very faithful and flexible people.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Our park meetings were a consolation for me too. Felt kind of like early church kind of moments, like, we're out here just figuring it out. I'm also thinking of how we amazingly were able to welcome new partners in Covenant into Circle of Hope in the midst of this pandemic year. Some on Zoom, but also some in person, and baptisms. It was a real joy to me to be able to baptize some partners.
Absolutely.
Kind of wild that we did baptisms over Zoom.
Yes. Anything's possible.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and our cells, that makes me think about our cells. Just so grateful that before the pandemic, we were already organized into these smaller groups that meet, because for the ones that were meeting in person, it was safer to do that in a small group than a big group. And I think people generally took care of each other and got to know each other more and included new friends. And that people found faith in the midst of this really difficult circumstance. And that was so encouraging to me.
Yeah, and the resilience of our leaders. I agree with Rachel and our leadership team to get through a difficult 2 years, couldn't do it without them. So I'm really proud of them and the work they put in. Just a lot of labor, a lot of work, a lot of difficult conversations in difficult places. So I'm grateful for them. and also for our staff. Hey, Laura, you're a consolation. How do you like that?
Absolutely.
And Jimmy and Holly as well. Just making it work through difficult times as a church, you know. We've been through a big leadership transition over the last few years as a church, and so it's bringing up a lot of stuff and requiring a lot of faithful leadership. So, and I'm impressed by our team.
Absolutely. I would add to that, I'm so grateful. One of my personal consolations has been to be, surrounded by leaders whose love and sacrifice and commitment to Jesus is like demonstrated over and over again. And I'm grateful for leaders who have helped me to become more truthful. And even when that's hard, and see things that I didn't see before. Another consolation, I was looking through my photos because it helps me remember. And the day I got my vaccine, I'm like glowing. And I remember after I got the shot, I was like welled up with tears. And then I was surprised at how emotional I felt. But I think yeah, right? I want to hold on to that, the gratitude and the relief for what vaccines made possible in this past year, even though we still feel so restricted and not through it. I'm so grateful for the lives that were saved through vaccines.
I was so excited. I took a selfie of myself after I got vaccinated with my card with all the information on it. And my kids were like, "Mom, you got to take that off of Instagram. Like, you're putting all your info out there." But I was so glad to be vaccinated.
Yeah, it is liberating for sure. And I'm just thankful for the doctors, the epidemiologists, all these people that, and even today still, I mean, the hospitals in Philly are packed. Most of them, like Einstein, Temple, Penn, Jefferson, are all at almost full capacity. Like 88 to like 103%, their beds are full. So like, y'all, if you're doing that work, you know, God bless you. I mean, you're saving us. You are really important, and you know, we think our work's important, but we honor really what you're doing. And you have to do, and all the in-person people, you know, the people that can't do remote work, you know, credit goes to you. So big time. Grateful for you. And you're putting yourself at risk, especially these days. So, you know, I pray for a different way of doing things, but in the meantime, I'm consoled by people's self-sacrifice. Because even I started with my discouragement about like, hey, we can't get through this, we can't do it together. But a lot of people have done a lot of good. And your whole church has made, y'all have made tremendous sacrifices to make this happen and to make everybody safe. So that's not lost on me, and I think our team. Like, it's a big deal that you did this. So, yeah. You know, sometimes existence is resistance, right? And surviving is thriving.
I'm thinking of more good things that happened. We got a new floor put in our meeting room. I'm also thinking of our Jubilee movement led by our Circle Mobilizing Because Black Lives Matter team. Raised a bunch of money. What was the final total, Julie?
It was over 30,000, right?
Well, yeah.
Yeah, it was awesome.
Redistributed wealth. That's a huge act of resistance. Yes, I'm so grateful for them leading us into that, and for the way that the church responded.
Yeah, as a consolation, I as hard as this work has been, and how in many ways we're just getting started and we have a long way to go. I am grateful for the voices the marginalized voices that have been lifted up and heard among us. Thinking of our Circle Pride Teen 2, speaking for queer folks among us, and
Big time.
grateful for that. Grateful for them.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Any last consolations, pastors?
Yeah, I just want to echo that, Rachel. The alliance that our people have formed and the connection has made it possible for me to continue in some ways. I'm grateful for that. As hard as the anti-racism work has been, there's been a lot of good work. So I'm glad you brought that up. That consoles me, A lot of people, in some ways, fighting to stay in the church, but, fighting for what they think is working for what they think is God's vision for the church. It's difficult work. So, and there's being able to endure the desolation and the pain and the oppression for the hope of the future, for coming light. That's inspiring. And I think that's the gospel too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, personally, I can say that over this past year, I think my relationship with Jesus and my approach to Scripture has changed and deepened precisely because of the way that I've seen the love of Christ and the demonstration of the gospel from these leaders and partners that we're talking about. They have changed me and my faith and opened up a deeper way of knowing God. Mm-hmm. I pray that will be possible for all the next people too, that the work that we're doing together as a church is inclusive work. It is transformative work. It is the gospel embodied. I pray that the kingdom of God will be revealed and expanded through our little community here in new ways in the new year coming.
Amen.
Amen.
I pray that too.
All right, so let's end our show with spiritual show and tell. We're going to tell the audience things that have been nourishing our soul. Who wants to get us started? How about you, Rachel?
My soul has been nourished this week by a song that I keep listening to. It's been on repeat throughout my week by Brother Isaiah. I didn't realize that Franciscan monks could make YouTube videos and put them out there. But this guy has been doing it for a couple years apparently, and he's an amazing musician and songwriter sharing his life with God. And this one song is called Receive Me, I'm Yours, on his album Poco y Poco, Little by Little. And it's just so tender. He even stops singing and whispers to God as Abba and says thank you. So it keeps calling me into this place of trust and surrender and also gratitude.
What's his name again?
Brother Isaiah.
I didn't know Franciscan monks made YouTube videos either. I'll have to look him up.
So we'll definitely have that in the show notes too, y'all.
I should say my friend Becca sent me that song. I would not have known about him. Thank you, Becca Koval.
Nice. Well, I have a friend to thank for what has been nourishing my soul too. Yesterday, my friend Jim Getz arrived at my door with a warm loaf of sourdough bread. And I texted him later and said, not only was it beautiful, picture perfect beautiful and delicious, but just receiving it and literally feasting on it with my family fed my soul. Mm-hmm. So that has been feeding my soul. I think precisely because it was both care for my body and just being cared for. The act of being thought of, the kindness of him showing up. How amazing is it to get a warm loaf of bread delivered to your door? And we made homemade grilled cheese sandwiches with it that were incredible. So
Did you use the whole loaf, by the way?
We didn't. No, we tried to slice thinly so that we could make it stretch as far as possible. So there's more left over today.
Risky business slicing a warm loaf of bread in my household. You gotta let it cool until you can cut it open because too much moisture escapes. So I'm not... What Jim did for you and what you were experiencing, that can't even occur in,
you wouldn't allow.
in my kitchen. So like...
Not even if you could finish the whole loaf right there in that sitting.
Well, you can commit to the whole loaf. That's just a lot of bread, you know.
That would not be too hard. If there's butter close by, I could do that. But we didn't cut it open while it was warm. It was hard, harder for Steve than for me because I was working downstairs. He was the one smelling it all day. But we waited for dinner time, so it was sufficiently cooled.
I'm sure it was fine,
know. Yeah, I didn't know that was a problem, actually, but...
People will disagree about that, but, you know, rolls, bagels, you can eat those right away. Muffins even.
Because they're like a single serving that gets consumed.
You know, but, you know, don't cut your pie too soon, y'all. Wait for the lasagna. Don't slice your turkey right away. Just chill.
Or your steak.
Just hang... Exactly, Rachel. Patience. It's important.
Let it rest.
How about you, Johnny?
Circle of Hope Audio Art came out with a new record this year, our fifth record. We Are Not Separate. And here's how we're describing it. These songs were written in a community of people whose conversations around life and faith led to deep reflection within ourselves as individuals and within our larger self as one body. As we live out questions like, who is God? Who am I? Who are we? How do we interact with each other, the world, and the earth in a way that's rooted in love and justice? It's a short record. You can find it anywhere you stream music. So I have it on Apple Music. It's on Spotify as well. It's also on our YouTube channel if you do music that way. And it's also on our Bandcamp, which I will link in the show notes. I'd love for you to listen to it and support it. You can share money directly with that cause as well. So a lot of different ways to connect. Our original music... for me, is just, it nourishes my soul all the time. So I recommend We Are Not Separate by Circle of Hope Audio Art to you.
It's beautiful.
Thanks again, y'all, for listening. Thanks for being here the whole year. This isn't our end of season episode. Just so you know, we're going to keep going until Lent when we take our break. But hope to see you next time. Go in peace. Go in peace, like I'm ending a Sunday meeting. You know what I mean? You're listening to Resist and Restore, a podcast from the Circle of Hope pastors where we're expressing, I don't know the rest of the line. Woo! I couldn't even do it.
Happy New Year.
All right. You're listening to... I said expressing instead of extending. That's why it didn't make any sense to me.